Welcome everyone to Defender for Cloud in the Field. Thanks again for your audience. Our Microsoft Security channel continues to grow, so we truly appreciate your time watching those videos. Make sure to subscribe to our playlist. I'm going to put the link here below. And click in the bell to receive notifications when new episodes are uploaded. Today, I'm very happy to have here a great friend of mine from our team that is going to talk about Defender for servers. And this is almost like a follow-up conversation from one of the older episodes we had. We're going to go deep into Defender for servers and mainly around this integration with MDE. So without further ado, my friend Janetscheck.
Thank you very much for having me here today. Totally excited to be talking about Defender for servers. And yeah, let's kick it off.
Yeah, but before, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about what you do for Microsoft.
Sure. So I'm a senior product manager in the customer experience engineering team. We are the team that is basically helping our strategic customers to deploy Defender for Cloud. And at the same time, we're the customer's voice for the feature team. So yeah, this is one of the main reasons why we're engaging. So we're not only helping to deploy, but also directly capture the feedback, bring it to the feature team, and make sure to improve the product. And in my role, I'm especially focusing on Defender for servers. So yeah, that means that when I'm talking to my customers, it's mostly about that one plan. And we know it's a very complex plan. And yeah, that's why I'm totally happy to be talking about it today and to make sure we can demystify it as much as possible.
Awesome. There are basically two plans that we introduced with Defender for servers, right? And
right.
And I think that one of the main questions that we see a lot on from customers and also online conversations is around the difference between those two plans, and not only the technical difference from the capability standpoint, but also when should I use one versus the other. So give us a little overview about those plans and the use case scenarios, please.
Sure. So as we mentioned, Defender for servers is one of the plans, or actually it's two of the plans inside Defender for Cloud as a product. And what we did when we introduced Defender for Servers Plan 1 last year, we actually added a smaller plan compared to what we already had. The main idea behind Defender for Servers Plan 1 is to offer an integration with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint for multi-cloud machines. So no matter if that is an Azure VM or if it is an on-prem server or an AWS EC2 or GCP compute instance, at the end of the day, it's one plan with which we can provide Microsoft Defender for Endpoint deployment and integration to all the servers. Now, Defender for Servers Plan 2 is what we always had as the Defender for Servers plan. And this not only offers the integration with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, but also additional enhanced capabilities, such as our own threat detection based on a monitoring agent, or additional capabilities such as adaptive application controls, file integrity monitoring, and for Azure VMs, the Azure Network Layer threat detection. So we are able to provide insights into security issues that we are not able or only able to capture from inside the operating system, but also by providing this insight directly by monitoring the network layer. Now, the question, or one of your questions, was about when to use what plan. And it's not too easy to answer, but I will give it a try. As I said, Defender for Servers Plan 1 is the MDE integration. So that is the plan that has a unified selling proposition of enabling you to deploy and integrate Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. This plan is available across all the environments that we are supporting. So you can enable it everywhere for every machine. You can also enable Defender for Servers Plan 2 for every machine, but there are some capabilities that are only available on Azure, and that is everything around the network layer threat detection, so adaptive network hardening, and the threat detection capabilities that I just mentioned before. This is only available for Azure VMs. And then we have just-in-time VM access as a part of that plan, which is only available for Azure VMs and AWS EC2 instances. The other capabilities are available for all machines. So now it depends on what is the actual value that you're looking for. If you only want to have the integration with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and you want to leverage Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management as part of the MDE sensor, that's fair enough. Then Defender for Servers Plan 1 would be your plan to go. If you're more looking into advanced scenarios, like connecting your Log Analytics or Azure Monitoring Agent to the Log Analytics workspace, or if you want to use the agentless vulnerability scanning capability that we are offering on Azure and AWS at the moment, then Defender for Service Plan 2 would be your go-to plan. So it really depends on the scenario that you're looking after.
Yeah, and I know this is a tricky question. That's why I ask anyway. But we get this question, right? And each customer will have a different need. So they need to do this self-assessment, reflection of what they really want, and look at the capabilities on P2 and see if those capabilities will be important for them. So it's really case by case. It's very hard, I know, to give a very generic question. But one thing that is important to emphasize in both plans is that when it comes to pricing, there is that vision that is $15 per server per month. And a lot of people don't realize that is actually a calculation per hour. In other words, if you turn off the machine, you're not going to be charged, right?
That's correct. And actually what we did recently, we updated the documentation for Defender for Servers, and it now includes one table that will exactly show what is the machine status that we are billing for. So this is not only true for Azure VMs, but also for machines that are connected via Azure Arc. We are just looking for separate status codes, and if the machine is switched off, then you're not being charged for that machine. So the $15 you mentioned before is for Defender for Servers Plan 2, and it will only apply for machines that are running 24/7 for every day in a month.
Yeah, so that's an important distinction. And even internally at Microsoft, sometimes this question comes up. So we updated the documentation to make it more clear about that. It was always this way, but there was a misunderstanding because in the dashboard you see $15, right, on the Defender for Cloud, but it's actually $15 if you assume that the machine is on all the time. Now, you mentioned Defender for Endpoint in both plans. So how this integration works behind the scenes?
That's a good one. So what we actually do is we have a backend process that allows us to deploy Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to machines. And then that process will onboard the machine, it will deploy the sensor, then onboard the machine, and then there's a backend integration. How that works from a technical perspective, we had a recording for that with Errol from the engineering team, who's actually the owner of that experience, and he had a great slide deck in that recording. So we are gonna show that in a link underneath. But from the experience, if you want to enable it, what you actually do is you will enable the integration with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and then you will enable Defender for Servers on your subscriptions. And what happens is that Defender for Cloud will make sure, and this is the backend process that we are leveraging, that the MDE.Windows and MDE.Linux extensions are deployed to your machines. So all the machines in the scope, no matter if that is an Azure VM or if it is a machine that is connected through Azure Arc, that will get such an extension. And then in the operating system, there's an onboarding script that will run. So the extension actually is the management interface that we are leveraging. You can refer to it similarly as something like a custom script extension if you want to. So something that you are aware of from Azure Virtual Machines probably. And then so in the operating system, we are injecting an onboarding script that will check some prerequisites and will then start the onboarding process, which means it will deploy the MDE sensor, which is the agent. And that sensor is going to be connected to the MDE backend in the same tenant. And once that happened, MDE will make sure to send us the software inventory information and also the security alerts for this particular machine. Now, in case you want to also leverage Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management as the VA solution on top, that is something you can also do, and it's just a one-time setting on a subscription. That will basically just stimulate the MDE backend to also give us the VA findings, the vulnerability assessment findings for this particular machine, so we are able to show it in Defender for Cloud.
Good. now comes the trick question, right? Because we also have scenarios where customers, they already have a EDR solution, but they still want to use some of the capabilities available in Defender for Servers. So one question that comes up a lot is, okay, I don't want to deploy MDE,
Okay.
but I still want to use the other capabilities available on P2. How can I do that?
That's also a great question. So what we just did like a few weeks back is we changed the experience a little bit, because back in the days, the Defender for Endpoint integration was a separate setting on the integrations blade, so a different blade in Defender for Cloud, and you needed to be aware of that setting, that it is there. So what we did is we removed that setting and changed it into the settings and monitoring blade. And this is the blade that we back in the days have been calling auto provisioning. So now that experience has been moved into the same blade with all the other agent scenarios. So you can now go to one page in which you can enable and disable the deployment and the integration with agents. This now includes MDE. So what you do is you will basically go to settings and monitoring on your subscription, disable the endpoint protection integration, and this is the setting for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and then enable Defender for Servers Plan 2. As of then, you will be able to use all the Plan 2 capabilities, but we will not deploy Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to your machines.
And since we are talking about agents, let's go a little bit deeper on that, because there are a lot of different scenarios when it comes to agents with log analytics, agentless now, which is a capability that we also have. Can you explain more about the different scenarios?
Absolutely. And for this, I actually brought a slide deck with me because it might be a bit too complex to talk about it just in words. So from a historic perspective, we have been relying on the log analytics agent, and we still rely on it. So the log analytics agent integration is something that is GA within the scope of Defender for Cloud, and you can leverage it for all the scenarios that I will be talking about. But there is a transition phase at the moment, because the log analytics agent is going to be deprecated, currently planned for August 2024. So there needs to be an upgrade path into the Azure Monitor agent. And in the meantime, what we did is we offered similar experience now with an additional agent. And with this slide deck and the matrices that I'm showing right now, I want to give you some insights into what it actually means to select one or the other agent. First of all, it's not only Defender for Servers, but also some capabilities in foundational CSPM that rely on agents. So when you are using the log analytics agent in your environment, then the OS security baseline recommendation, the endpoint protection recommendation, and the system updates recommendation will leverage that log analytics agent. When using the Azure Monitor agent instead, it looks a little bit differently, because the Azure Monitor agent itself actually will only provide the insights into the endpoint protection recommendation. Now, this is the recommendation that you are aware of in Defender for Cloud's foundational CSPM that will look for an anti-malware solution deployed to your machines. For the system updates recommendation, we just released a public preview that will rely on the Azure Update Management Center, and that leverages the native VM or the Azure Arc agent capabilities. So there is no dependency on the monitoring agent itself. And the OS baseline recommendation, for this one, we are leveraging the guest config extension. That is something that is coming from Azure Policy. It is included in Azure Arc already, and it is an additional extension for virtual machines. Now going a bit further into Defender for Servers, there are also agent-based scenarios that rely on different agents. Again, with Log Analytics agent, file integrity monitoring, adaptive application controls, and the OS level and fileless attack detections outside of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint will rely on that agent. You can also leverage the Azure Monitor agent instead. So that is something that is public preview right now. And if you're new to Defender for Servers and you're looking into deploying a monitoring agent, then you could already go to Azure Monitor agent, but be aware that it is not yet GA. The integration is public preview. I'm not saying the AMA, the Azure Monitor agent, is not GA, because that is generally available. It's just the integration with Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which currently is in public preview. And then we have the dependency on Defender for Endpoint if you are looking into deploying that one. So if you're not using a third-party EDR solution, then Defender for Endpoint Integration is something you should enable all the time, because it will offer you the anti-malware and the EDR capability. And in addition to that, you can leverage the integrated vulnerability assessment solution, which we call Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management. There's also the Qualys VA extension that will offer a similar experience, but it relies on a different agent. And if there's not any need for using it, for example, if you're using a third-party EDR solution, you cannot leverage Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, then you might be looking into using Qualys VA. But there's a new capability, which is the agentless VA scanning capability that we introduced at the last Microsoft Ignite. That will rely on not an agent, but only on disk snapshots that we are creating. And the information that we can collect from these snapshots will then be sent to the Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management backend to be assessed, and then the findings will be sent back to Defender for Cloud. So you see, it's a bit complicated to really understand all the dependencies with all these agents. But I believe with that matrix, you can at least get a good overview of what are the agents that you can deploy and what are the scenarios in which you can select which one. So you either use Log Analytics or Azure Monitor Agent. You never use both at the same time with the integration with Defender for Cloud. And then on top of that, you can decide if you want to deploy Defender for Endpoint, if you rather would deploy the Qualys Vulnerability Assessment extension, if you want to use the Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management agentless scanning capability on top, or in any combination.
Yeah, the table definitely facilitates that. I hope that y'all got a screenshot of this table as we went through these slides. The agentless that you mentioned, there is a lot of talk about this new agentless capability, which is part of our Defender for CSPM plan, which is right now in public preview. When I say right now, as of February 2023. In which scenario is the agentless the most recommended solution? Because there's a lot of misconception that, oh, I'm agentless now, so I really don't need the agent, which is not necessarily true. There are space for both, and there is actually a bigger advantage when it comes to using agents. So can you clarify that?
Yeah. So if I'm getting that question from my customers, I usually tell them that agentless scanning is always a solution to be enabled. The reason is that it is part of Defender CSPM, but also Defender for Servers Plan 2. And it not only bridges gaps within the scope of feature availability, but also it provides you insights even if you have not yet deployed any other solution. What it means is that the agentless VA scanning capability that we have relies on Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management, and we can use that capability in all the scenarios where we cannot deploy an agent, where we do not have the required network access permissions, because an agent needs to be connected to its corresponding backend. And it will provide insights even if you have not yet deployed the agent. So that means that if you are looking into gradually deploying Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, for example, then you will get the VA insights already before the MDE sensor had already actually been deployed to a machine. So you see, it's a variety of scenarios in which agentless scanning adds additional benefits. Now, I would never go that way to say use rather one solution over the other, because we will not get rid of agents. Agents are something we need to have in order to really create real-time insights, or to protect you from something that is happening on a machine, to block something on a machine. That is something we cannot do in an agentless way today. But the agentless scanning capability adds these additional capabilities on top of the agent. So as long as the agentless scanning is enabled, you will get the vulnerability assessment insights in any situation that I mentioned before. Then you can deploy the MDE sensor on top of that if you want to. And as soon as an agent-based solution is deployed to a machine, it will take precedence over the agentless vulnerability scanner. So what we're actually doing is we will give you insights in a way quicker way without having to rely on any of the mentioned dependencies. And at the same time, we're shifting the agent-based scenario to the right. So if you're a persona who is looking in your role, if you're looking, for example, to cloud security posture management only, then why would you think of relying on an agent, right? Mm-hmm. And that totally makes sense. If you're just looking into vulnerability assessment as part of security posture management, then you can use the agentless scanner and you will get the insights. The agent then comes into play in the more advanced scenarios. If you're looking for cloud workload protection, if you want to see threat detection on a machine and so on, but that oftentimes is a different team. And it might come a little bit later in your journey of protecting your server. So it totally makes sense to have both solutions deployed, but agentless scanning is something that I would recommend to directly enable if you have Defender CSPM, or if you have Defender for Servers Plan 2 enabled. I would always recommend to enable the agentless VA scanning capability.
Yeah, and I think that the point is about the journey, as you mentioned, right? They have their own advantages in specific parts of this journey to the cloud. So as you said, with the agentless capability, you have those insights early on in this migration process,
right?
And you can rely on that information. But then as you go to the right, as you mentioned, you have a time to plan the deployment of the agent and everything. So it fulfills a gap that we used to have and we don't have anymore. So that's great.
Right.
I think that the same thing applies not only to Azure, but also multi-cloud and on-premise, correct?
You mean the agentless scanning capability?
Yeah, the approach of protecting machines, not only in Azure, but also multi-cloud. We have the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, well, today we have the agentless scanning capability on Azure and on AWS. We do not provide it yet for GCP. We do not yet provide it for on-prem machines. But for the time being, you can definitely use it on AWS and on Azure.
And just if you're listening to this later on in 2023, just keep in mind that this episode was recorded in February. So that's the reality now. We are always evolving. So make sure to, if you are watching this later in the 2023 year or even next year, who knows, make sure to check the latest information on the release notes. I'm going to put also the link here for the release notes, because every month we add the new stuff in the release notes. So it's a great documentation for you to add on your favorites. Ton, we've been through talk. We could talk for hours around this, but we are really on top here. So I just want one more question to close this thing up, which is about deployment at scale. Can you give an overview of how can I accomplish deployment at scale for Defender for Servers?
Yes, of course. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, Defender for Servers probably is one of the most complex plans that we have in Defender for Cloud. And enabling the plan itself is pretty easy, because if you look at it from a technical perspective, enabling Defender for Servers Plan 1 or Plan 2 is a REST API call against the Microsoft.security/pricing's API provider. But there are some additional things that you need to keep in mind, which is about the agents that need to be deployed, and which is probably about the agentless VA scanning capability to be deployed. So what you could do is, if you want to enable it at scale, which means you don't want to go to 100, 200, or even 1,000 subscriptions, and then in the UI enable the plan on every subscription, and then go to settings and monitoring and select which agent you want to have deployed to what machine. If you want to do it at scale, I would go ahead and use policies for that. There are some built-in policies that we are actually using when you enable the auto-provisioning or the settings and monitoring settings in Defender for Cloud. So whenever you click enabled, it will, in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, it will assign a built-in policy initiative or a policy definition. And these built-in policy definitions are what you could leverage to enable Defender for Servers. So the steps would be enable the Defender for Servers plan that you're looking after, and then use the built-in policy definitions to deploy the Log Analytics or Azure Monitor agent. There are some built-in policy definitions to also deploy Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. That's not what we are leveraging in the backend usually, but you can use it And then there is also a custom policy initiative, or I think it's only a policy definition that you can use to enable the agentless scanning capability. So the plan needs to be enabled, the monitoring agent needs to be configured and deployed, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint needs to be deployed, and the agentless VA scanner would have to be deployed. And that's all what you can do based on policies. But you could also build your own custom automation with REST API calls or leveraging PowerShell. And if there's not a PowerShell commandlet, then again, you can leverage the REST API at the end. Yeah, I think that's pretty much
covers,
it.
Yeah,
so,
that covers for sure. There is a really good article as well about deploying Defender for Cloud as a code. I'm going to put here the link for you to see it, because there is also the capability that is available. And that's pretty much it. It was a really long episode, but I think we all need this information. So Tom, thank you very much for joining and sharing all the insights around Defender for Servers. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. And as you said, we could be talking for the whole day about Defender for Servers, and I hope it definitely clarifies some of the most burning questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you again.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. Again, make sure to subscribe to our playlist, and see you again next time.